August 17, 1969, 11:47 p.m. Tommy Strings. Kowalski crouched in the equipment tent behind the Woodstock main stage, frantically restringing Jimi Hendrix's backup Stratocaster when he overheard a conversation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As the festival's most trusted guitar technician, Tommy had worked for everyone from The Who to Janis Joplin, earning his reputation through 20-hour days and an almost supernatural ability to keep instruments perfectly tuned in any weather condition. The 28-year-old son of a Polish steelworker had stumbled into the music business by accident, but his meticulous attention to detail and unshakable discretion had made him indispensable to rock's biggest stars. What Tommy was about to discover in that equipment tent would reveal a conspiracy so shocking that the most powerful figures in the music industry would spend decades ensuring it never became public knowledge. The secret involved government surveillance, drug experimentation, and a plan to use rock music as a tool for social control that reached all the way to the highest levels of the Nixon administration. Tommy had always prided himself on being invisible, the guy who knew everyone's secrets but never gossiped, who could fix any guitar problem in minutes, who showed up early and left late without expecting recognition or credit. His small apartment in Queens was filled with guitars belonging to famous musicians who trusted him more than they trusted their own band members, and his phone rang constantly with emergency calls from artists who needed his services at all hours. "Strings, you're the only guy who understands my Gibson like I do," Hendrix had told him just months earlier. "You don't just tune guitars, you tune souls." But Tommy's value to the industry went beyond his technical skills. It was his absolute reliability and his unspoken agreement never to repeat what he heard in backstage areas, recording studios and hotel rooms where rock stars revealed their true selves. The conversation Tommy overheard that night involved three men whose voices he recognized immediately: Robert Shelton, the most powerful music industry executive in America; Dr. Marcus Webb, a government researcher who had been conducting classified experiments with psychedelic drugs; and Colonel James Mitchell, a military intelligence officer who had been photographed at several major rock festivals despite having no official reason to be there. They were discussing something called Operation Frequency, a program that had been monitoring and influencing the counterculture movement through carefully orchestrated music events and strategic distribution of consciousness-altering substances. "The Woodstock experiment exceeded all our projections," Dr. Webb was saying, his clinical voice cutting through the distant sound of music and crowd noise. "The combination of specific musical frequencies, environmental conditions, and pharmaceutical enhancement has created the largest controlled study of mass consciousness manipulation in human history. We're documenting behavioral changes that could revolutionize crowd control and social engineering." Colonel Mitchell's response chilled Tommy to the bone. "The subjects have no idea they're participating in a research project. They believe they're attending a music festival, but we're actually testing techniques for managing large-scale civil unrest and political dissent. The music serves as both cover story and delivery mechanism for our experimental protocols." Tommy's hands trembled as he continued working on the guitar, trying to process what he was hearing while maintaining the appearance of normal activity. The three men were describing Woodstock not as a spontaneous gathering of young people seeking peace and music, but as a carefully orchestrated government experiment designed to study how music, drugs, and environmental manipulation could be used to control population behavior and suppress political resistance. "The beauty of the operation," Shelton explained, "is that the subjects are willing participants who actually pay for the privilege of being experimented upon. They come seeking transcendence and community, never suspecting that we're documenting their responses to various stimuli for future applications in riot control and crowd management. The hippie movement provides perfect cover for our research because they're already predisposed to altered consciousness and group behavior." Dr. Webb added disturbing details about the scope of their experimentation. "We've been testing different combinations of subsonic frequencies, electromagnetic fields, and psychoactive compounds to determine optimal methods for inducing compliance, euphoria, and group cohesion. The musical performances provide acoustic camouflage for our frequency generators, while our distribution network ensures that test subjects receive precisely calibrated doses of consciousness-altering substances." Tommy realized he was witnessing the revelation of a conspiracy that went far beyond music industry politics or government surveillance of political activists. These men were describing a systematic program to use rock music and counterculture gatherings as laboratories for developing techniques of mass psychological manipulation that could be applied to any large gathering of people. The peace and love movement that had inspired millions of young Americans was being exploited as a testing ground for methods of social control that could ultimately be used against them. The conversation continued with horrifying casualness as the three men discussed the success of their previous experiments at other festivals and their plans for expanding the program to include major rock concerts, protest rallies, and political gatherings across the country. The subjects' belief in the authenticity of their experience is crucial to the data quality, Colonel Mitchell observed. They must continue believing they're participating in genuine counterculture events rather than government research projects. Any exposure of our involvement would compromise the entire program. Before you continue this incredible journey of discovery and conspiracy with us, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories about the hidden truths behind history's most famous events and the brave individuals who risked everything to expose them. Tommy's mind raced as he tried to understand the implications of what he was learning. If the government was secretly manipulating major music events to conduct psychological experiments on unwitting participants, then everything about the counterculture movement might be an illusion carefully crafted to serve the interests of the very establishment it claimed to oppose. The music, the drugs, the sense of community and rebellion, all of it might be engineered to create controllable outlets for dissent while gathering data about how to suppress genuine political resistance. The technical aspects of the conspiracy became clearer as Dr. Webb described their equipment and methods. We've installed frequency generators in the sound systems of major venues, devices that emit subsonic vibrations designed to influence mood and behavior. The audience experiences these as enhanced emotional responses to the music, never suspecting they're being subjected to experimental manipulation. Combined with the targeted distribution of pharmaceutical agents through various vectors, we can create predictable psychological states in large populations. Shelton's role in the conspiracy involved using his industry connections to ensure that cooperative musicians received favorable treatment, better bookings, recording contracts, and media coverage, while artists who asked too many questions found themselves blacklisted or marginalized. The performers don't need to know the full scope of the operation, he explained. Most of them genuinely believe in their message of peace and love. We simply ensure that the most effective consciousness-influencing artists receive the platforms and resources necessary to reach maximum audiences. The conversation took an even darker turn when Colonel Mitchell discussed plans for crisis applications of their research. Once we've perfected these techniques through festival experimentation, we'll be prepared to deploy them during civil emergencies, political protests, or any situation requiring rapid crowd control. Imagine being able to pacify an angry mob through precisely calibrated acoustic manipulation, or to induce compliance in political dissidents through environmental frequency modification. The applications for national security are limitless. Tommy's horror deepened as he realized that the hundreds of thousands of young people at Woodstock, including many of his friends in the music industry, were unknowing test subjects in a government program designed to develop tools for suppressing the very political and social changes they thought they were promoting. The festival that was being celebrated as a triumph of peace and love was actually a massive psychological experiment whose data would be used to prevent future gatherings from achieving genuine political impact. The conversation ended with the three men making plans to meet again in Washington to review data collection and plan the next phase of their operations. As their voices faded and footsteps moved away from the equipment tent, Tommy found himself alone with knowledge that could destroy his career, endanger his life, and shatter the illusions of everyone he cared about in the music world. The guitar in his hands felt heavier than usual as he contemplated the weight of the secret he now carried and the impossible choice between remaining silent or risking everything to expose the truth. The days following Woodstock were torture for Tommy as he struggled with the knowledge he had accidentally acquired and the impossible decision of what to do with information that could destroy both his career and potentially his life. Every time he tuned a guitar or set up equipment for a major artist, he wondered whether that performer was a willing participant in Operation Frequency or another unknowing tool being used to manipulate audiences for government research purposes. The music industry that had been his passion and livelihood now felt like a sinister facade, hiding experimental programs designed to exploit the very people who found meaning and community through rock and roll. Tommy's first instinct was to approach Jimi Hendrix, whose intelligence and political awareness made him seem like someone who might already suspect that something was wrong with the festival circuit. But when Tommy finally worked up the courage to broach the subject, Hendrix's response was troubling. "Man, Strings, you're starting to sound paranoid. Of course the government is watching us. They watch everything that threatens their control. But the music is still real. The love is still real. And the consciousness expansion is still happening, whether they like it or not. Don't let their surveillance steal your faith in what we're creating together." The conversation revealed that even perceptive artists like Hendrix might be missing the full scope of the manipulation they were experiencing. He understood government surveillance, but not active psychological experimentation, recognized political monitoring, but not the sophisticated technological manipulation that was influencing audience behavior and emotional responses. Tommy realized that the conspiracy was so sophisticated that even its primary instruments, the musicians themselves, couldn't distinguish between authentic artistic impact and artificially enhanced psychological effects. Tommy's attempts to research Operation Frequency led him into a dangerous world of government contractors, military researchers, and corporate executives who had been developing crowd psychology applications since the early 1960s. Using his industry connections and technical expertise, he began documenting the equipment installations he had noticed at various venues, photographing devices that seemed inconsistent with normal sound system requirements, and tracking the movement of suspicious personnel who appeared at multiple festivals and concerts without clear musical industry roles. The breakthrough in Tommy's investigation came when he befriended Sarah Chen, a young journalist who had been covering the counterculture movement for underground newspapers and had begun noticing strange patterns in festival organization and crowd behavior. "I keep seeing the same faces at different events," Sarah told Tommy during a clandestine meeting in a Greenwich Village coffee shop. "People who claim to be music fans but never seem to actually watch the performances. They're always taking notes, monitoring equipment, or having quiet conversations with festival organizers. Something's not right about the whole scene." Sarah's journalistic instincts and Tommy's technical knowledge created a powerful investigative partnership as they began systematically documenting the conspiracy that was using the counterculture movement as a laboratory for psychological experimentation. Their research revealed that Operation Frequency was just one component of a larger program called Cultural Control Initiative, which had been testing various methods of population management through entertainment, media, and cultural events since the late 1950s. The evidence they gathered included photographs of frequency-generating equipment installed in major venues, financial records showing government payments to music industry executives, and personnel files revealing military and intelligence backgrounds of individuals who had infiltrated festival management organizations. Most damaging of all were audio recordings Tommy had made using equipment borrowed from recording studios, capturing conversations between government researchers and industry executives that detailed their experimental protocols and data collection methods. "The scope of this thing is incredible," Sarah said as they reviewed their accumulated evidence. "They're not just monitoring the counterculture movement, they're actively shaping it, influencing its development, and using it to test techniques they plan to deploy against any form of organized dissent. The hippies think they're creating a revolution, but they're actually providing data for counter-revolutionary programs." The personal cost of their investigation became apparent when Tommy began experiencing surveillance and harassment that made clear his activities had been detected by the conspiracy's security apparatus. His apartment was burglarized twice, mysterious phone calls threatened his safety, and several major artists suddenly canceled contracts with him without explanation. "They know what we're doing," he told Sarah during one of their increasingly careful meetings. "The question is whether we can expose this before they silence us permanently." The breakthrough that would ultimately expose the conspiracy came when Tommy discovered that Dr. Marcus Webb was scheduled to present research findings at a closed conference of military and intelligence officials in Washington, D.C. Using his industry credentials to gain access to the hotel where the conference was being held, Tommy managed to record Webb's presentation, which included detailed descriptions of Operation Frequency results and plans for expanding psychological manipulation techniques to mainstream political events. "Our festival experiments have exceeded all projections for crowd control effectiveness," Dr. Webb told his audience of government officials. "We can now reliably induce specific emotional states in large populations through acoustic manipulation, pharmaceutical intervention, and environmental design. The subjects remain completely unaware of our involvement, believing their responses are authentic reactions to artistic performance rather than controlled responses to experimental stimuli. The recording captured even more disturbing revelations, as Webb described plans to deploy their techniques during upcoming political conventions, anti-war protests, and civil rights demonstrations. The same methods that create euphoria and compliance at rock festivals can be adapted to pacify political dissidents and neutralize organized resistance movements. We're developing portable systems that can be deployed at any large gathering to influence crowd behavior according to operational requirements. Tommy's hands shook as he realized the full implications of what he had recorded. The government wasn't just conducting psychological experiments on festival audiences, they were preparing to use those techniques to suppress legitimate political protest and democratic participation. The counterculture movement had been transformed into a testing ground for tools of political oppression that would be used against anyone who challenged government policies or corporate interests. The decision to release the recordings and evidence publicly was both courageous and desperate, as Tommy and Sarah knew that exposing the conspiracy would make them permanent targets of the very forces they were challenging. They chose to release their findings through multiple underground newspapers simultaneously, hoping that broad distribution would make it impossible for the government to suppress the story or eliminate all copies of the evidence. The people deserve to know that their consciousness, their emotions, and their political beliefs are being manipulated through the very music and cultural events they trust most, Tommy said in the statement that accompanied their evidence release. The peace and love movement has been infiltrated and exploited by the same forces it was created to oppose. Every festival goer, every concert attendee, every person who has found meaning in counterculture gatherings deserves to understand that their experiences may have been artificially enhanced or controlled through secret government experimentation. The immediate reaction to their revelations was explosive, but divided, as the counterculture community struggled to process evidence that their most sacred experiences might have been manipulated by the establishment they had rejected. Some activists embraced the exposé as confirmation of their suspicions about government infiltration, while others rejected it as paranoid conspiracy theory that threatened the unity and positive energy of their movement. The aftermath of Tommy and Sarah's exposé created unprecedented chaos within both the music industry and the government agencies involved in Operation Frequency, as powerful forces scrambled to contain the damage while discrediting the evidence and eliminating the sources. Within weeks of the story's publication, both Tommy and Sarah found themselves under constant surveillance. Their sources were intimidated or silenced, and a coordinated campaign was launched to portray their revelations as the paranoid fantasies of unstable individuals who had misinterpreted normal security procedures and legitimate research activities. The music industry's response was swift and coordinated, as major record labels, concert promoters, and media outlets worked together to marginalize Tommy and Sarah while reinforcing narratives about the authenticity and spontaneity of counterculture events. These conspiracy theories are exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that the government wants to encourage, declared Robert Shelton in a widely published statement. By making young people suspicious of their own cultural movements, these false accusations serve the establishment's interests in dividing and weakening the peace movement. The sophistication of the cover-up became apparent as Tommy watched his credibility systematically destroyed through a campaign that included planted stories about his alleged mental instability, forged documents suggesting financial motivations for his accusations, and testimony from industry figures who claimed he had always been unreliable and prone to paranoid fantasies. "They're not just denying the truth," Tommy told Sarah during one of their final meetings before she disappeared. "They're rewriting reality to make the truth impossible to believe." The fate of Sarah Chen remained a mystery that haunted Tommy for the rest of his life, as the young journalist vanished without trace just weeks after their story broke. Her apartment was found empty with no signs of struggle. Her newspaper contacts claimed she had never worked for them, and even her personal friends began denying they had ever known her. "It's like she never existed," Tommy realized with growing horror. "They haven't just silenced her, they've erased her from history." The psychological toll of fighting a conspiracy that controlled both the narrative and the means of communication drove Tommy to increasingly desperate measures as he tried to preserve evidence and continue exposing the truth despite mounting pressure and isolation. His attempts to interest mainstream journalists in the story were unsuccessful, as editors either dismissed his claims as unsubstantiated or admitted they couldn't publish stories that would threaten their organization's relationships with powerful government and corporate interests. The validation that Tommy had been seeking came from an unexpected source when a former government researcher named Dr. Linda Morrison contacted him through encrypted channels, confirming the existence of Operation Frequency while providing additional details about its scope and continuing operations. "Everything you documented was accurate," Dr. Morrison told him during a clandestine meeting in a remote location. "But it was only the beginning. The programs have expanded far beyond music festivals to include political rallies, religious gatherings, and even routine entertainment events. They're testing mass persuasion techniques on unwitting populations across the entire spectrum of American cultural life." Dr. Morrison's revelations included disturbing information about the long-term effects of frequency manipulation and pharmaceutical experimentation on festival attendees, many of whom had experienced lasting psychological changes that they attributed to spiritual awakening or personal growth rather than external manipulation. "The subjects don't realize they've been altered," she explained. "They interpret the changes as positive personal development, never understanding that their consciousness has been modified through technological intervention." The underground network that began forming around Tommy's revelations included former government researchers, disillusioned military personnel, investigative journalists, and counterculture activists who had begun recognizing signs of manipulation in their own experiences. The shadow community worked to document ongoing operations while developing techniques for detecting and resisting psychological manipulation, creating a hidden resistance movement within the very cultural spaces that were being exploited for experimentation. "We're fighting a war for human consciousness," Dr. Morrison explained to the growing network of allies who were working to expose and resist the conspiracy. "The government has weaponized culture itself, turning our music, our gatherings, and our spiritual practices into tools for social control. The only defense is awareness. People can't resist manipulation they don't know is happening." The long-term strategy that emerged from this resistance network involved creating truly independent cultural events that were explicitly designed to counteract government manipulation while providing authentic experiences of community and consciousness expansion. These liberation festivals included technology for detecting frequency manipulation, protocols for ensuring pharmaceutical purity, and educational components that taught attendees how to recognize and resist various forms of psychological manipulation. Tommy's role in this underground resistance transformed him from a simple guitar technician into a technical expert on detection and countermeasures for consciousness manipulation technologies. His knowledge of sound systems and acoustic engineering proved invaluable in developing equipment that could identify and neutralize the frequency generators that were being used to influence audience behavior at mainstream events. "I went from tuning guitars to tuning human consciousness," he reflected on his unlikely journey from music industry insider to resistance fighter. The personal cost of Tommy's commitment to exposing the truth included the loss of his music industry career, the constant stress of living under surveillance, and the isolation that came from possessing knowledge that most people couldn't or wouldn't accept. But he also found purpose and community among fellow truth seekers who understood the magnitude of what they were fighting against and the importance of preserving authentic human consciousness against technological manipulation. The evidence that continued accumulating over the years validated Tommy's original discoveries while revealing that Operation Frequency had been just one component of a much larger program of social engineering that had influenced American culture for decades. Government documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests, testimony from former intelligence officials, and academic research all confirmed that music festivals, political rallies, and cultural events had been systematically used as laboratories for testing crowd control and consciousness manipulation techniques. The legacy of Tommy's courage in exposing the Woodstock conspiracy ultimately contributed to a broader awakening about the ways that culture and consciousness could be weaponized for political control. His story inspired other insiders to come forward with evidence of manipulation in their own fields, leading to revelations about psychological experimentation in television, advertising, education, and virtually every aspect of modern media and entertainment. The secret that rock stars had kept hidden, that their most powerful performances might have been enhanced through technological manipulation rather than purely artistic expression, forced a fundamental re-evaluation of authenticity in popular culture. Musicians began demanding transparency about venue equipment and festival organization, while audiences learned to question their own emotional responses and seek out genuinely independent cultural experiences. Tommy's final years were spent teaching others how to detect and resist consciousness manipulation, while continuing to expose new aspects of the conspiracy that had originally been revealed at Woodstock. The truth doesn't disappear just because powerful people want it hidden, he often told young activists who were carrying on his work. And once you know how to see the manipulation, you can never be fully controlled by it again. The guitar roadie who had accidentally overheard a conversation that revealed one of the most sinister conspiracies in American history had ultimately helped preserve human freedom by ensuring that the techniques designed to control consciousness could never be deployed with complete secrecy. His story proved that sometimes the most important historical truths were discovered not by famous investigators or powerful officials, but by ordinary people who happened to be in the right place at the right time with the courage to act on what they learned. The hidden secret of Woodstock, that the legendary festival of peace and love had been used as a testing ground for government techniques of mass psychological manipulation, remained one of the most disturbing revelations about how power operated in modern America. But Tommy's exposure of that secret had also demonstrated that no conspiracy was so sophisticated that it couldn't be challenged by individuals who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice, ensuring that the dream of authentic human consciousness and cultural freedom remained alive despite all attempts to control and manipulate it.